Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. And we are zooming in and focusing in today on a great viewer question that came in, and that is really what happens when covert narcissists collide. And before we get started, I just want to give a huge shout out to those of you who have recently donated to the channel. Thank you so much for your support, your inquiry, your comments, your suggestions. I really do value your viewership. Thank you so much. And thank you for helping to keep me inspired to keep the content flowing here. It's so good to hear from you. And I'm so glad you found the channel a resource for tools, knowledge, and understanding and discussion on these very important relationship issues. This is not medical advice. We are talking about relationships. And when it comes to relationships, sometimes we stumble upon some very difficult, challenging, but very pleasurable ones at the same time, or very important, very significant. So it becomes very difficult to sort of thread out the details. So that's what we're going to flesh out here. And absolutely positively, if the channel has been a positive influence to you and you've learned some good tools, resources, absolutely please feel free to participate here and donate to the Peace and Harmony channel now button here on the homepage, the About page at Peace and Harmony. So let's get started. This is a great viewer question. What happens when two covert narcissists collide? What happens when these two personalities find themselves attracted to each other? What happens when they get along famously? They're like flint and steel. I mean, they just seem to really hit it off, spark, and rub each other in all the right ways. And I have received a number of viewer questions similar to this, so I think this is a great topic here for today. It's very interesting because really these two personalities can have quite a creative or productive or positive dynamic. In other words, they seem to be getting along very well. They brush up shoulders, they brush up bellies, they seem to really get along in a lot of the right pistons. In other words, there's a certain je ne sais quoi, a certain chemistry that can be hit off right off the bat. And it can oftentimes be a reflection because you're mirroring each other. You're mirroring each other's egos. In other words, what's all about sort of the status, the relationship, the going out, a lot of the conditions that are related to sort of feeling good about yourself. So you can have this covert narcissist relationship where all of a sudden these people really feel great about themselves when they're together, namely because of the reflection of each other's egos. You might be involved in certain restaurants or certain creative projects together. You might have your name on the same book or sort of in that same light. In other words, where you're sort of mirroring each other's accomplishments. You're validating each other. So there's this symbiotic sense of supply. But you know, the issue is that oftentimes one is more pretentious or pretending of the others. In other words, it's very jovial. There are certain things that you say to each other or that these covert narcissists will say to sort of hit the hot buttons. In other words, there's a sort of manipulative intent. It's not just, you know, genuine, that's developed over time and sort of appreciation. There oftentimes can be a sort of a very superficial appreciation to these relationships. In other words, it's condition oriented. You know, you're with me for this vacation. You're with me to, sort of go out to these events or, you know, for this season, for this high time. It's kind of like the fair weather friend syndrome. In other words, and there can be a lot of certain things like gift giving or drinking or dining out or hotel stays. So there's a lot of sort of conditions or fluff that tend to really pad this relationship and sort of give it that comfort zone, like we are hitting it off famously. And I say hitting it off famously when you see covert narcissists collide because there's this validation that, you know, you are marrying to me the person who I want to be. In other words, it's a design of who I want to be, but it's not always reflecting of who I am. In other words, you know, there's that stuff that can be swept under the rug, that is never aired out, that you sort of, you know, hold your true personality, defects, quirks, so to speak. In other words, after a few couple months, eventually someone in that relationship is going to get tired of holding it in. Or they can just become, have this relationship run its course, meaning, in other words, you were here for me for this concert series or this dining out or, these gifts or through this patch in my life. And eventually one of these individuals, it's not going to be able to hit on that next level where it becomes really a committed relationship, where the genuine feeling, caring relationships, it's unquestioned. The covert narcissist oftentimes has a very difficult time being alone. So these relationships, the colliding between covert narcissists, can be relationships of convenience. In other words, wouldn't it be nice if, your money could help me find a place to live? Or, wouldn't it be nice to have a man in your life? Or wouldn't it be nice to have a woman in your life? There's not this sort of organic, I care about you, and you kind of get me through sort of the thick and thin. There's always this sort of hiding or masking or pretentiousness that can plague this type of relationship. And even though they can go along swimmingly, hummingly, they hit it off very well, there can also be sort of this, unspoken questioning, unspoken discomfort. In other words, if you were to know the real me, you might not really like me. So there's this always feeling of like you have to be put together. You can't have a hair out of place, or a feeling as if, I have to sort of impress you, or I have to play up to you. And if you don't play up to them, then there's this sort of hollowing out. Again, it's the lack of empathy between the two. And the collision is when, there's eventually someone will tire of this. They don't want to play the part anymore. They don't want to play the role. They're sort of playing the role of the boyfriend, playing the role of the girlfriend, playing the role of something. And it's not really sort of like I'm in this for the passion of it. I'm in it for the label of it. So I want to have a date. I want to have a companion. I want to have a confidant. So it's more, I find, in my experience with working with these types of individuals and seeing their relationships and kind of knowing these relationship dynamics very well, it can be, very jovial and sort of very upbeat and, but yet there's a bottom that's going to fall out. Someone's going to go on a trip. Someone wants to, explore other areas of their life. It just so happens, but, you should have always known about this about me. I'm just, you can't tie me down like this. There's a sort of pathological self-importance that is sort of running through the relationship. And often historically, that is what makes the relationship attractive. In other words, certain tales of what you've done or who you've been through or who you've lived. There's a certain clout or a certain caliber that, you put yourself out as. And so it's like, oh, well, it's very conditional. Well, yeah, I mean, we hit it off here so well, but of course, you're a this and I'm a that. You're a marketer and I'm an analyst, or, it seems to hit off on this very sort of ego-driven relationship. And ego is all about that sort of public status validation. It's all about really what fits into the compartment, the box, the label, who I want you to see me as. So there's oftentimes can be a lot of persona management in these relationships. In other words, and it's, of course, it's part, there's a public persona and a private persona, but it's really when these covert narcissist relationships collide, eventually that public persona is going to get some boots and walking on. These boots need to get a walking. Someone is eventually going to need to either step up to take the helm and be more the leader, do more of the work, more of the providing, the taking out, I'm listening about you. It becomes slightly imbalanced. And that's really when, if you're not getting your needs met, the narcissistic ego-based needs, then that's eventually where the relationship is going to run its course. So the collision is kind of like, it's kind of like two deers, beginning to tangle a little bit. They're testing each other's might, each other's prowess, each other's wherewithal, the challenge of the relationship. But then the challenge doesn't become fun when, the other is sort of, keeping on the heels of the other so much. Toes start to get, stepped on. You're trying to they try to show each other up a little bit. And, this isn't pleasant, but, you can kind of feel it coming. You can kind of see it in these relationships. In other words, someone from the outside looking in could say, I can see where this relationship would not last. One person need to have too much validation. They have too much of that narcissistic, I need you to validate me or be excited for me or, do these grave acts of chivalry or be ultra feminine or ultra masculine or whatever it is that they're trying, the narcissist, the covert narcissist will be in the relationship because they feel it's going to mirror them at their level. So they like to have that, that sort of leadership or where someone kind of is very proactive for them. But eventually the one who's doing the proactive is going to want to be like, well, what about me? What am I getting here? And the narcissist is always about what am I getting out of it? It's not about just existing in a relationship. When we talk about people who have empathy, eventually, essentially they can just be with each other. They don't have to impress. They don't have to stress out over a lot of different things. It's just this, it is what it is. It's not always looking for labels, judgment, comparison, challenges. It's just kind of like there's more of a sort of a gentle comfort in the relationship because, there's a feeling and empathy there that is self-generating and it's not threatened with paranoia. You're not concerned that one is trying to look better or outdo the other. If you have these talents, hey, so it is. I'm not going to try to sabotage you or manipulate you to, so that I can be the one up. There's, with healthy relationships, there's a feeling of just general balance, equality, lack of judgment, lack of criticism, lack of belittlement. There's a feeling of just comfort and trust. But with a covert narcissist, there's going to be a distrust in the relationship or one that, it's not spoken, but it's subconsciously felt or determined or always on gauge, always on drive when they're in relationships. In other words, what are you giving to me? What are you giving to me? What am I getting out of this? There's always this assessment versus can we just be together? Can we just, is this harmonious? So it's a little bit, it's a very different dynamic. But the main issue is when there's going to be this disconnect is eventually when one is taking too much from the other and the other feels like they're giving too much. Narcissists generally, don't like to give. And if they do give, it's going to be with strings attached and you're going to hear about it and they're going to, remember that time, 5 years ago when I gave you this and this at the party or whatever it is. I mean, they're always going to sort of hold that, what they've given as sort of in, it's always sort of a pre-calculated. You feel like there's a ticker bar. You feel like I gave you this, I gave you this, I gave you this, you gave me that, I'm expecting this. So there's this always expectation for, well, you're going to take care of me now. And so the narcissist always wants to be on that one directional receiving end. They want to have props. They want you to send them the text, the pictures, whatever it is that's making them feel good. Oh, here's my picture of you. You look great here. You're always having to mirror them. And so the very difficult thing is, you can, oftentimes, they can go quite far in relationships because it's kind of like, I would just call it like the Hollywood relationships. Oftentimes you see these relationships break apart because they're relationships between two narcissists and one either starts earning the other, or the money that they have gives them power, that they feel that they can exploit others and they don't have to be true. They don't have to communicate. They have an entitlement to them that they can just kind of do as they please. But quote unquote, there's the unspoken rules of the relationship. Well, I thought we were exclusive. So, the narcissist oftentimes, they don't want to define this. And if they do define it, it would be kind of like negative. They don't want to be held down. They don't want to be held accountable. They want to do things their own way, their own terms. And, they want others to sort of give into that. Okay, I defer to you, this person, you have the leadership role in our relationship. So there's always this sort of, but there's, definitely relationships with people who are empathetic, who are very supportive of these people for a long period of time, until eventually they're not getting their needs met in return. So it's even sort of higher powered between two covert narcissists. And it might be all sort of for show, or for a certain temporary ego boost, or supply. So that's really the hurt. That's really sort of the devalue and discard. If you feel that you're sort of onto them, or you see that this might not be going anywhere, yet you don't want to call it off because you don't have your backup supply ready, or you don't have a good reason, or haven't found somebody who's better than you. So you've got all these sort of, statements of convenience sort of plaguing the relationship with these people. And it's kind of like, if you ignore the truth, it's eventually going to rear its head. If you live in a lie, the lies only thicken, get deeper, take more energy to repress. Believe it or not, defense mechanisms and pathological lies take a lot of energy. They take more energy out of you to maintain than just to live life freely. So that's why we talk about being empowered. It's about living free. And it's about having that energy shift where you can just be. You can energize yourself. You're sort of on automatic pilot now of what's naturally good and beneficial for you. And you can easily say no. You don't need others to surround you and validate you. You become self-regenerative. You become self-healing. And then you attract relationships which are healthier, more fun, more satisfying, more rewarding, because they're actually there. The narcissist, oftentimes, they're not really truly going to be there for you. In other words, if for sickness, or for, loss of a job, these are the people that are like, they're not there when the going gets tough. They're expecting everything to be perfect oftentimes. The narcissist is all about, how does this reflect onto me? And oftentimes the covert narcissist will have very few friends or relationships or acquaintances, because they sort of feel that they should only, hang around or be associated with people of a specific status, or certain titles, or certain income, or certain physical possessions. So there's a lot of these qualifications that they tend to hold for others. And so they can be very solitary in that regard, and then try to have, oftentimes maybe a lot of their needs met by, a couple supply sources. And then that person goes and is all the social butterfly, does really all the heavy lifting and social negotiation, within relationships, or setting things up, or making plans or events. And so they can kind of allow that, and then let them take the helm, and they can just be the backseat and receive all the benefits of this sort of, highly energized or leader relationship. So it's not to say that it's going to, damage each other, but it's more like a wounding of egos, a wounding of pride. And so really to be secure is to say that, it is to recognize that relationships are a bonus. Relationships are a gift. Relationships are 1 in a million. It's very difficult to find a true, authentic, genuine friend who can just be comfortable with you, who you don't have to impress, who you can laugh, who you can go out with, and you can be joyful for them, and in turn they can be joyful for you. You don't feel threatened by their accomplishments. You don't feel threatened by changes that they're making in their life. You know, the ego-driven covert narcissist, you know, can be very threatened. You know, oh, what do you mean you got this promotion? Oh, what do you mean you're going on this trip? There's always this sort of questioning or judgment sort of insinuated and woven into the fabric of the relationship. You know, oh, what do you mean, you know, your son is going to do this, or your daughter, or you've got this pet? You know, there's always sort of like, you know, a little bit of tug of manipulation. In other words, you know, I'm the one who looks good here. You know, it's got to be all arrows here. And so it can be very, very weird, especially when you eventually get into other relationships on down the road and other things happen, and you know, you're eventually the lid, you know, flies off the top of the relationship, and then you know, you really sort of break paths, and you sort of, you know, cleave it off, is when, you know, something weird happens, you know, and then it's like, you know, you're sick. Well, you're going to get sick too, you know, or just these sort of babyish, sort of immature, sort of the unmet, you know, narcissistic ego, which, you know, eventually comes out of the woodwork, and you're like, and then there's the spat, and then the, you know, the coming of ways, and then the stonewalling. You know, eventually someone is going to make a fool out of themselves, and then the other is just going to be like hard-nosed or stonewalled, or just, you know, really shut it down and then be very aloof. And so, you know, you don't, you know, this can get extremely ugly. And, you know, you don't want to create more negative experiences. For a covert narcissist, you know, who's someone who is a covert narcissist, you know, they always feel like, you know, they've got their own back, and life will just keep dishing it up to them. And, you know, these are their expectations. So if it's not met here, oftentimes there's kind of a lack of loyalty, or a feeling that there's always something being hidden. I would say that's perhaps one of the major qualities of the covert narcissist, is you kind of feel, it's not only that they have a private self, but you just feel that there's a lot that's unspoken, unsaid. And it reminds me of that song, you know, it was, you know, maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, and it's like, you know, I wish I would have told you, you know, my feelings, but it's like, now that you're gone, it's too late. You know, it's too late for me to share with you my feelings. I can't really think of the song right now, but the feeling or the concept of it is that, you know, I should have, you know, told you. I shouldn't have wasted my youth. I shouldn't have taken our relationship for granted. I shouldn't, you know, because you were my father. You know, I never really told you how much I really care about you, or I love you, or my mother, same way. You know, but, and so there's the feeling that you can't really open up your feelings with a covert narcissist. If you do, it's kind of like you're looking at like, well, you're crazy for feeling this way. And it's like, well, this is normal. This is natural. This is why I feel this way. And so there's really sort of a disconnect on that true, deeper feeling level. In other words, you just can't like let it all hang out. Eventually with this, you know, someone is going to need to be it together. You know, unless there's this sort of very delicate balance of the give and take, and you're mirroring each other, and, you know, you're just being who you want to be, and you can self-maintain, and you don't need sort of, you know, ego supply from this person, or narcissistic supply. There's healthy narcissistic supply where someone acknowledges you, validates you, and there's that already in the relationship. I mean, that can be lovely. If it depends really how severe. So, you know, in terms of like, you know, it's such a case-by-case basis, but you can really start to feel that the relationship is going to have issues when things really begin to get out of balance, and you're feeling like you have to keep the other in check or keep yourself in check. You know, this can be a sign that you or your partner has a lot of work to do, or some work to do. And it's to understand that, you know, hey, eventually this is going to come up in the relationship, and either, you know, you can handle this on your own and be happy with what you've got, and not always feel like, well, oh, you know, is something better going to come along? I mean, that's like the narcissistic, you know, hallmark. Well, you know, I'm going to leave a window open in like a little eye over there just to see if something else better comes along. I feel that oftentimes is also a paranoia and a feeling of insecurity or instability or uncertainty in the relationship with a narcissist is that you kind of feel like you don't really have them at hello. You don't really, there's a certain part of them that can just, slip from your hands, and they're not really, there's a sort of a feeling that they're not really present, or they're not really communicating something, that they're not really sort of, that there's something sort of hidden, that they're not really sort of out there, and it's not really, all out there, if that makes any sense. Energetically, you feel that there's a lot of withholding. They're tart-lipped, and, that is part of the issue, is that there's a certain lack of communication on certain topics that makes it very prohibitive or feeling foreboding, and like, is this relationship doomed, or are we going to make it? It really does depend on each relationship, but I hope that this video helps, and I hope we've given some insight into the dynamics when covert narcissist relationships collide. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Make your day worth it. Have a beautiful day.